No idea.
Got it. We're being live streamed. Preparing the live stream.
It's happening.
It is.
We're there. We should invite friends to join us.
Yeah. Here they come.
Here they come.
Hey, Janine.
Did you tweet it? Do I need to retweet it?
I'm posting in the channel of the HangOps. There's so many places.
I know. I'm gonna smash that emoji on it. Cut of meat. All right. Where's
ready to tweet?
I'm eagerly awaiting.
There. You've got the tweet ready.
It's on. Oh, deck. There it is. There it is.
Yeah.
Copy link to tweet. Another week. Another HangOps.
Yeah. Hello.
With us.
Scott, I thought I was hurting you.
You are. You mentioned both COBOL and YAML in the same statement, and that hurts my soul.
Oh, I thought you were replying to my tweet that HangOps was starting, that you weren't going to make it.
No, I wouldn't do that.
Yeah. You'll never guess who said that thing about COBOL and YAML.
Probably not, to be honest.
I'm not going to out them. That's not the true nature, the true way. This is not the way of the overheard.
Yeah, be cool. Be cool.
Yeah. Hey, Steven. You got a mic on your head.
I didn't know if we're allowed to do this or just watch. So
you do whatever you want.
I mean, yeah. But I'm eating cookies and drinking coffee for breakfast. How about that for doing what you want?
I mean, if you're gonna have cookies, you got to bring enough to share with everybody.
Come on over.
I did go and enable the waiting room because we'll have to figure out how to make that a default setting. But then we have to like go into Zoom settings.
Yeah.
And that makes me sad.
Yeah, I might have to edit it because I think I'm set as the host on the actual meeting.
We all know how good that worked out last week.
God. I think I disabled participants can share. I know they can start video. Oh yeah, sharing isn't. Yeah, who can share? Only the host. There we go.
It is cool that this is the first live stream to the HangOps YouTube in 5 years.
Is it 5 years?
Yeah.
Oh my goodness.
If I go there, yeah, the last one was 5 years ago. 2016. Amazing.
Yeah.
So what's everyone working on? What's going on?
I'm working on this. But you knew that, Pete.
Wait, tell us a little bit about this. So you're doing community again, and just you guys wanted to resuscitate the HangOps.
Yeah. So so I work with Pete at Alma, and I do community stuff. And part of the community stuff is live events of various sorts and flavors. And for now, like that's all online because it's the world we live in right now.
It's always been the world.
I mean, I've been working remote since 2008. And even before that, like I worked when I worked at IBM, nobody that I actually directly worked with on a regular basis was in the same physical location as me.
Right.
Yeah.
Yeah. The remote, also same. We've been remote for a long time, but now the opportunities to work with other people and everything, it's great. Now everybody's sort of in the same boat. I think that's a real big key to this whole resignation thing, if you want to call it that.
the great resignation. Oh my goodness.
For people like want to live, we had a lot of friends that want to live in the woods and just have a good internet connection, and now you can. And you can work pretty much anywhere.
Uh, define good. Like how fast the internet can you get in the woods?
Oh, do they get?
I like-
what's the speed of 5G? Can you get?
I
How
think
far
it's-
does 5G go?
It's like 9,600 baud, I think.
96.
Oh, yeah, dude, you can run a BBS on that. You're good to go.
Oh yeah, my first BBS is on a 2400 baud.
Yeah, dude.
What's up?
It's like got my hotline server going. That's really old school.
I
Anyway,
honestly wish I
Hotline.
still had my my acoustic coupler 300 baud Hayes modem. That would
Hell
be
yeah.
that would be sweet.
how I mean, how is community now that everybody? I mean, I feel like community is pretty different, like from even 5 or 10 years ago, right? What that means. I've been talking to some open source people. You saw that. It's a lot of like ugly crying right now, but it's bad doing
Yeah.
open source. But I don't know if that necessarily means community, right?
Well, yeah, I mean, Alma's product isn't open source, so we don't have
Okay.
like an open source community, developer engagement kind of thing. Right. So like we're trying to, figure out what that means.
Right. So there's like the community, like DevRel, like the Maddie Strattons. Shout out to Maddie.
Yeah.
That kind of angle, and then community. I always think of community as like contributing, but maybe I'm being too specific. Like community contributed code, things like that. But but I know
Yeah,
it
you
means
could-
much more than that. Yeah.
You could even contribute like learnings and stuff too, right? Like
Mhm.
just things that are interesting, and you're trying to, you learn today, and someone else doesn't know.
Well,
a lot
I
of-
think HangOps is a perfect example of, a thing that is community, right? Like we've got this whole Slack of apparently there's 11,000 people in the Slack, but 5,000 of them are in the active HangOps channel. But then there's like the Cry Party channel that has another 1,000 people in it, which there, of course, there's overlap.
Makes
But
sense.
some people aren't in the regular HangOps channel, and they only hang out in like whatever specific place. So like communities, they form around the things that they care about.
I
That
think
actually
we have a lot of oh,
should you?
sorry.
I was sorry. I was just gonna say, do you want to post into the, like, if people have like muted announcements? Which, God, why would you mute announcements? That sounds crazy.
Well, now that announcements isn't like the general channel where everybody is a captive audience, I don't know. Like I'm not gonna. I don't want to rock the boat too much with in terms of like what might upset thousands of people. I've seen
Baby
that
steps.
go awry. I've seen that go awry. I saw an @ channel in a Slack with 15,000 people in the Rand's leadership Slack.
Yeah, that should be disabled though. That's a miss by the admins. That's
Yeah.
disableable at this point, I think.
Was
Oh,
the
yeah.
message LS?
No.
Like, are you typing the wrong?
The Yubi key.
No, but there's 63 oof emojis on it.
Different oof emojis.
No, 63 just of oof. Yeah, it was.
Oh, that was the reaction to it.
Yeah,
Nice.
yeah, 16,000 people in the intros channel. Yikes.
So going back to your question or comment about community and the open source and stuff like that, like I feel like we have a pretty strong community, but the way that I would define it and the way that we kind of look at it is not just contributors, but like Pete said, people who like write blog posts about it and do that kind of thing, as well as just I don't want to say advocacy or like spreading the word, but there's a little bit of that as well in there. And we have forums like most other places do, and they're pretty active and stuff like that. But we also have a really great community team for each of the products to talk about it and sort of help that out and be a liaison between the participating community and our engineering teams. So it's been pretty successful, I'd say, to be honest.
Yeah. I think it's funny. I bet you have more people on your community teams at HashiCorp than Alma has employees.
Oh yeah. My God.
Probably. But we're like, we just bulked that up, that number of folks up, and got some really, really solid people managing that now. It's
Yeah,
really
that's
awesome.
great.
That's the thing is like, I guess I'm not ex HashiCorp community or I'm still in the community, right? You're still doing the stuff. So yeah. I mean, this is a lot, you know, in a kind of smaller musics, they call it a scene, right? And it's sort of come as you want, go as you want. It's the media, zines, shows, reviews, bands, you know, fans. You can't have without the sort of people using your software. What I think is interesting though is we were just at KubeCon, and by far, I didn't see that many, like, I guess customers or users as much as you just saw like kind of vendors hanging out with each other. There's this idea that you started seeing in the music industry what they called street teams, which were the industry trying to make a scene or a community, right? And I think that's also
so 90s.
interesting. Yeah, that's
Oh my God.
But you know what I mean, though. It's like, so I've seen that, like, you know, they call it like astroturfing in politics. But I see a lot of, you know, VC funded companies that are basically like, we need community. And then they just start laying down that sod, right? Like just straight out, right? Which is very different than 10 years ago or 20 years ago, where you have like an academic sort of open source, you have mailing lists. Like I'd say, look at mailing lists and you'll see kind of the state of some of the old style community. And then you see kind of what's happening now. I think it's interesting what's happening now. Oh, there's Matt. Like, you know, I watch him a lot for this kind of thing. Anyway, I'm just talking.
I have so many thoughts about all of this.
Excellent.
And I missed maybe the last few minutes because I had to go put my contacts in and change from watching y'all. So, but I think it's when you were talking a little bit, Joshua, about like doing community when you're not open source. And I heard someone mentioning about like, it's not about contributors. And I think that's one of the things that's been really interesting. Like, so like I'm at Pulumi now, but I was at PagerDuty before. So like one of the hard things with community with something like PagerDuty that is closed source and your identity is tied to the company you work at right then. So even if you build stuff within your PagerDuty life while you're working at, you know, Big Corp number one, that all goes away when you go somewhere else. So like that was always a really hard thing to deal with. And like the other thing we're starting to see like with Pulumi, and you know, it's no surprise, like coming from Chef and stuff like that, is like contribution to core is not where the community contributes, right? It's like all the stuff that builds around it, right? How do you find that and help be a force multiplier for people wanting to do that? That's the other thing. It was Tessa Crystal had like a really interesting tweet the other day about like marketing treating developers like a feral cat, right? Like you have this cat that comes around and you feed it and it's okay, but then you're like, oh, let me give you all this love, and the cat's like, screw you, I'm out of here. And you know, like community nurturing is hard because it's ultimately got to be valuable for the people. But it's, you know, we're also living in a capitalism, right? So, you know, all these things don't get paid for otherwise.
I think there's another point that you kind of hinted at a little bit there, Maddie, is that like one thing that's really, really hard to build a community around, and this is sort of like a problem that PagerDuty, I'm not going to speak for folks at PagerDuty, but PagerDuty being sort of a SaaS kind of thing, or some kind of basically not a piece of software that you would go and install on your machine or use on your machine. I mean, there's PagerDuty agents and all of that fun stuff and the apps, but like actually building a community around a SaaS or cloud offering is really hard because there really isn't a lot of contribution that can happen there in terms of code itself.
I think it's hard to do if you try to do it using the playbooks that we do for all the other stuff, which was, we've kind of talked like, and that was the thing I learned with at PD and stuff, is we sort of talk about like OpsRel, right? Which is like, when you look at traditional DevRel, it's like all based around like utilization of the API. Like you have all these wonderful metrics and ways of measuring and getting people to try a thing and do all of that. But tools, right, and practices that are not around writing code inherently, like SWE stuff, those play. So I'm going to challenge and not necessarily even say that it's harder. It's hard if you try to do it the same way, right? If you don't understand that it's a different type of community, it's not a community based upon code contribution, but there's content contribution, right? So like for us, we do a lot where we try to think about like, what are people organically doing? And it's all about, in community, again, from the filthy capitalism side, you're trying to build advocates, right? Because it doesn't scale to just hire a bunch of Joshuas and Maddies and everything for your team. It's like, you want the community to do that, right? And but one of the ways, if you have a nice clean API, like there's consumption, but there's what are the people out there doing? And I feel like there's a few of us who were at Chef and we saw that, right? Like that happens. Like you have those people, we could all think of who they were, who Chef Software Inc. didn't give them a dime. They didn't work for Chef, but they were fierce advocates and not just from code contribution. So, yeah,
I would totally agree with that in that framing. So yeah, it's just different. And at the end of the day, you're enabling the people to do the things that they need to do with it.
I don't think
different source.
I don't think I ever contributed any code to open source Chef. Maybe like some very questionable one-liners, which I'm very well known for. But otherwise, it was like I probably did more in just like Chef summits, conferences that were held, talking nicely about it. Honestly, like that's a pretty good thing if someone's going to say nice things about your product.
Yeah, I mean that speaks volumes too, right? Like people saying nice things about your product, especially on Twitter, is immensely valuable, rather than the norm, which is just getting mad on Twitter and table flipping everything because you hate all YAML or Ruby code or whatever it is.
Yeah, I mean, there's you can get mad at anything on the internet. It's truly just an amazing thing.
I think that's what makes it slightly harder right now is you have a lot of new tools, you have a lot of communication in general, and it's easy to just go on Twitter and you could literally like trash someone's whole like advocacy in like 10 minutes. Like it's scary for some of the smaller companies that are just getting started because one person can just, it's like we used to call it the Yelp effect, but one bad review and everyone just sees that, right? Or but in some ways, controversy would help a lot too. So, there's sort of the engagement idea where you could just, basically go along with all the bad, almost say we wrote the worst software ever. And then people start defending it and people start agreeing and it starts getting that arousal. So I think community building is interesting right now too, because for everyone, like if I went and trashed Matt's company, there would be a bunch of people that might defend it. And then he has very strong advocates. And I'm like, here's my invoice, right? For that. Right?
I see you're iterating my sales eng process at Chef, which was often telling people, oh, you're right. This is bad. I guess you don't want it. Oh, no. That's not what I said. That's not what I said. Yeah. No. We're ready for it. We're ready for the DevOps. I swear.
I still run into hardcore Chef, like crusaders, basically still like it's a powerful thing to get through adversity. So when you're in a corporate environment, you like a tool, you've fought those fights, you've defended it, you've spent weekends writing the code, which you shouldn't do, but and then and like you said, you're doing double duty on projects you care about, plus doing your day job. It starts to be not only an identity, but something you spend a lot of time on. There's a lot of sunk cost fallacy. And I think that's a strong advocate. But if the software doesn't keep up, which maybe has happened in the past, it can also be like this thing where the companies have to keep their bargain too, right? It's scary to be an advocate for something that isn't keeping up, right? And so it's kind of like you're the biggest fan of the losing team. That's nice in sports, but maybe not so much in tech.
Cubs fan, right? It's interesting you said that because I used to, when I was at PagerDuty, and a lot of the fights that we would be having, maybe sales or whatever, is kind of fighting through traditional ITIL, ITSM, and one of the things I said is, remember, that person who's has ownership of that framework at Big Corp, like number one, you're right, Lauk, right? It's their identity, but they had to fight blood and sweat and fucking tears to get that to happen. And now you're going to come in and tell them their baby is super ugly, right? So it's a losing proposition. And I think too about something I remember, like Adam said years ago, we were at like a sales kickoff and someone was talking about like, basically battle card puppet stuff or whatever. And it was some combination of like Chip Johnson and Adam. So I don't know who I'm attributing this to properly. But imagine you're this person and you had this thing that you started to do and it like made your life amazing, right? And you get that dopamine hit of like, holy shit, everything was awful. And then I did this thing and it's so much better. And then now I've got this jackass is going to come over and tell me, hey, that thing that made you feel so good, that's actually not as good as it could be. There's a better way to do it. I'm going to be like, screw you. This is amazing. And I think that's the thing to always go back to is anytime you're trying to get people to change, like our identity is connected to it, but also our experiential piece of it too.
Yeah, I think it's easy to project one's own experience onto the other, right? Like the amount of times that people don't even try to meet people where they are and then bring them along for a journey. It's kind of like you get that intense rejection because of course, why would I want to like change everything that I just did for this? Like people oftentimes are like, well, it's technically better. And I feel like that answer is also just really boring these days too.
I mean, yeah, it's technically better. Said nobody ever about YAML. Is it the
right.
YAML comment in there just to get Scott's hackles up?
Actually, Maddie, I'd be curious because you've been doing advocacy for a while. How do you separate you from the company, especially when you move from like company A to B, right? Like, I don't think you've ever done the like, oh, I used to work at PagerDuty and now I work at OpsGenie. Like that's probably a little bit weird and probably violates some non-competes that someone has signed. But it's like from chef to this, like, how do you separate like the you from the place that pays you the monies? Oh, you're muted. I bet you're saying some really good stuff though.
That's not true. I was thinking for a second. So I'm going to take it back to something I used to say at Chef, and this is vaguely true still, but I used to say I work at Chef because I believe in Chef. It's not the other way around. Right. And that was the case. I think a lot of us, with maybe the exception of Joshua, who was there, wasn't able to be part of the Chef community before working there because he started right away. But like for a lot of us, right, that would happen. You're part of the community, then you want to go work there. And PagerDuty was a little different, but I think what's helped me is that I go places that I generally believe in what I'm doing, right, and what they're doing. And they're somehow connected to something that is part of my personality. But I will say that after Chef and PagerDuty, I distance my identity from my own personal boundary. And I think everyone should do this, whether you do advocacy or not, from the company where I work, right? How much of us bled Chef Orange, right? And the thing that sucks is when that's true, no matter what company you work for, they're going to do something shitty at some point. And when you are connected to that in your personal identity, when your company does something shitty, you feel like you have this responsibility and obligation. And it really came to mind when I went to Red Hat. It was sort of like Red Hat or IBM could do shitty things and I didn't care because that wasn't me. And I am now at a small company where it's hard to not have that be the case because there's not that many of us, but still, and I don't expect Pulumi to do shitty things or whatever or anything, but like I think what we're doing is cool and I'm excited and that's why I came to do it, but it's not my company. I didn't found it, right? It's not Madiumi, so but how you keep that, but to your point, Pete, like how do you keep that like authenticity? And it's figuring out how you take the thing that's you and express it through what that mission, what that go to market is, if you will, or what the mission of that proper thing is, so you could look at Kat, for example, Kat Cosgrove, who's on my team now, right? Like Infracode is different and new to her, but like she's very genuine into it in the context of the things she's done before. And I don't want to say like what your brand is, but what your identity, where your expertise is, what's interesting to you, what's genuine about you. Like everybody on this Zoom here, you could go around and you could say that's your thing, and not like your social media brand, but just like the thing that gets you excited. And I know that's what turns you on. And then if you can say like, so where it would become a problem, to wrap this up, is if there was a big disconnect between the two, right? Like if you saw that where you were like, okay, I'm going from, like if I was going to go and work for, like I'm trying to even think of like a good example, one of those pink elephant companies, right? That's all old school idol, and be like, yeah, I'm going to go work there now. You'd be like, really? You feel like you compromised yourself because that was a thing I knew was important to you.
Yeah, I mean, some of us on this call even have been the face for certain categories of users or customers where they really only talk to us. Like I was much more on the enterprise side. There's companies that like come to me and say, we're still working on your plan 5 years later that you came in and said. I think what gets really messy is the whole, like, we've been saying kind of the same thing. If you're saying something DevOpsy, the tools change a lot though. And so I get dinged all the time. People are like, oh, now you're here to sell the other latest thing. And it's like, well, yeah, I mean, we're doing the same thing. It's just now we're not doing it in Bash. We're going to do it in YAML or JSON, but effective, like what level are you going to like sort of tech snipe me on when I'm really saying the same thing all the time, which is like, how does this help your business? And, how do we make sure change flows correctly and things like that? But they're like, well, you were in here saying, blah, 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 and PowerShell was the greatest thing ever, and we should switch clouds. And I'm like, I mean, yeah, that day it seemed like a good idea. Like, so it's really hard for people like us to move away from working as a job at a vendor. But I always really tried to say those higher level messages, but that only gets you so far too, right? At some point, you got to actually get behind your products and stuff. And I think that's always difficult. In some ways, like right now, I chose not to be at a vendor. But also you don't need to also be at a giant company where you're tied to whatever they're doing politically. So it's a really good time to sort of, well, I think if you have the right things in place, it's a good time for any sort of seasoned veteran person. You can actually go out there and consult, which you could still hang with your vendor friends and still talk to big companies. And if you're out of your contracts, you can even talk to ex-customers and things like that. And I think that's going to emerge also as a group of people. But things like in the US, like healthcare really put a damper on working for yourself and things like that. But if 50 million people or whatever it was, 5 million people are out of work, you might as well take a chance now if you're thinking about that, because in my view, it's pretty good and you're established in the industry already. But try not to be the chef guy is hard. Probably hardest for Joshua too. But yeah, you have to work at a couple places.
I think Lauka goes back to like when you're saying people are like, oh, but you used to tell us this and now you're telling us this. If you have a trusted advisor relationship, it's kind of like, yes, and that's a feature, not a bug, right? Like I'm not but that trick is, I don't even say trick, it sounds like it's also sneaky, but like the piece is that it's happening not you trust. I'm telling you this not because that's where I work, right? It goes back to I work at Chef because I believe in Chef, like phraseology of that, which is like, and I think that's a thing that happens when people know and trust you. When you go somewhere, people will be very interested. I saw that happen with Bloomy. I think a lot of us have probably seen that when you go somewhere else, they're like, if you go to work at a vendor, they're like, oh, my ears perked up. Why did Cheslot go there? I'm interested. I want to hear. And so like, that's the thing you need to have a good answer for too, right? Like why? Right. Yeah. Rather than I think it's cool. Like, okay, there's a reason people are like, ooh, okay, I get it. I see how that connects to my perception. Or maybe it doesn't, because maybe their perception to you is wrong and screw them if it is, right? The only perception that matters is yours and mine. Everybody else can go to hell.
I think one thing that was I love you, Maddie. I think one thing that stuck with me from back in the chef days is, there was an attitude among some of us like in engineering, and I don't know how far that spread out to like the places where some of you others of y'all were working. But it was like talking to customers and going through that. It's like, oh, you have a thing that works for you? Awesome. Like, that's great. You know, what can we do to make that better? Like, what can we do to augment that? Like, we don't necessarily like want to change everything if what you have is working for you. I mean, obviously we'd love you to rip that whole thing out and buy our stuff, but like, if it's working, like, let's see where we can actually help. And I feel like that, like, augment but not confront sort of mindset can go a long way.
Yeah, I'll never forget. There was a Velocity, I think it was like in 2010 or 2011, where Adam gave a talk, and at the end of the talk, he said, "And I don't care if you're using Puppet or CF Engine or whatever else. I will help you solve your problems. Like, I want you to use Chef, and I understand that it's not for everybody. So, like, come find me after if you're having a problem with Puppet. We'll sit down and debug it." And literally, he spent the next hour and a half just helping people with like their random ass Puppet and Bash script problems and all those other things, and didn't have anything to do with Chef. And that was like always part of the culture, was to, we were interested in collaboration and, working with people in that community to solve their problems, not necessarily to just buy our stuff.
I think it depends on where you are in your motion and where your company is and where you're at to be able to do that, because at a certain point, you're not in a disruption play, because who the hell are you to disrupt anybody? Right. It's like, I always, say the biggest competitor is Do Nothing Inc., right? Not whomever, but in different parts of the org, and as the org grows, that mentality doesn't end up everywhere, right? Because if you're, especially on a sales side, you've got a number, you've got a thing, you got to go after everything you can. And sometimes it's actually easier to fight against a competitor than to fight against, I don't understand why I need you at all. Right. So like, if you're to go back to I'm intentionally avoiding current places I work and stuff like that. But like, if we think about Chef again, like, if you're already using Puppet, half that battle is won for me, right? You get this. Now it's just details, man. Right. Like, I can spin that, versus if you're like, I'm still hand artisanally crafting servers, I not only have to convince you that Chef is good, I have to convince you that the way you do shit is wrong, and this whole new way. So it's actually easier from a sales perspective to go after a competitor. But again, it's, that's the other, this also gets into this weird self-selecting thing we have in this more modern world that most of us inhabit, is there's so many people that are doing none of this. Right. And, so like, the addressable market is not all the people currently using your competitor. It's all the people not doing any of this shit. And we even have this weird perception. This is my last little rant about this, but like, I used to have this happen at PD with, Alex would be like, I talked to him about companies that had like production support teams, or, kind of the way that they were running their programs and their support and all this stuff. He's like, no, they don't do that anymore. And I'm like, yeah, dude, enterprise. No, I talked to all these enterprises. They aren't doing that. I'm like, dude, you talk to enterprises who are self-aware enough to want to talk to the CEO of PagerDuty. Right. Like, we have to remember that, like, all of our examples of like the big enterprises we work with are a very self-selected, small niche. So there's a whole lot of
the
work.
Venn diagram is a circle.
Yeah. There's a lot of work to do.
So me and Lauk and Maddie talk a lot.
Other people need to talk.
What are the rest of y'all thinking, feeling, doing?
Sorry, don't mind me. I'm just booking a flu shot on Costco because, that's my
Yeah.
brand. Kirkland brand flu shot here.
Did they do
Like,
an
which
off-label-
vaccine did you get, Cheslock? Kirkland
brand. Yeah, exactly. I really tried when they opened it up for like normal, like, people. I went to the like, it was like the last group or whatever that got opened up. It was like, I went to Costco because I was like, I kind of feel like after waiting all this time, it would be very on brand to go and pick up like 3 racks of ribs and the COVID shot. I think that would be amazing. And they just didn't have any openings at that. It was like they were, I don't know, a few weeks out. And I was like, all right, Like this other place, I can get it today.
Pete's meats and
Yeah.
vaccines.
Yeah,
I feel like,
Problem is-
you want like the 52-week aged vaccine. That's one of the better ones. So
Well,
The problem is
the-
you have to get like 16 of them when you get them at Kirkland. though,
Right,
at
you bring-
Costco.
you actually bring all your friends. So
they
that's the
have.
trick.
As I went to sign up for the service, they were like, select your add-ons, and it was like 10 other vaccines that you could get. Like,
I mean,
I'm like, I don't think I need those. But I don't know.
You
I'm not a
might.
medical professional.
You might.
I got the MMR booster because I'm in that age demographic of yours might not be good for much longer, so you might do that again. So I did that one, but I'm pretty sure I have all the other vaccines. I never got chickenpox vaccine because I got chickenpox.
I
That's how
did that
old
one
am.
and I got yellow fever vaccine because I thought I was going to be traveling out of country.
Yeah, I remember early on in the COVID thing, people talking about doing COVID parties, and I'm like, what? No, that is no. Chickenpox parties were totally a thing in the 80s, and nobody needs that.
Which honestly, like, was a bad idea in the 80s. Like that was not.
Yeah, I don't think
Oh, it
Joshua
totally
was
was.
endorsing it. I think he's
No,
like,
no,
"You
no,
did
I'm
this and it
not-
was
I don't
stupid. Let's
do
not be
this." Yeah,
stupid
this is-
again." Yeah.
We were dumb once. Let's not be dumb over and over. Speaking of operations,
We're humans. Come on. That's what we do.
We just like never learn over and over and over again. That's really what it comes down to.
that truly is. And speaking of Twitter,
I was going to say DNS, but whatever.
I sure
Low
BGP.
hanging fruit, easy target.
Yeah. Dunking on DNS. What did DNS ever do to you?
You don't want me to answer
Just-
that.
So many things.
It was this there for you resolving this whole time.
Or it wasn't. That may be the problem.
Secret even in success, right?
Yeah. What do people even do for DNS if they don't use like Route 53 or one of
You mean-
those?
Remember
Like,
IP addresses?
NS,
does
NS1
anybody
still
run a
has
DNS server?
I just have a
NS1
huge
has an
host
offering
file.
still.
I
used to.
actually a lot of the like if you do stuff more like home and stuff, I love the like whatever name.local that it just kind of serves out, which is great. I use that actually a lot.
I remember my first like internship interview. I was asking like, yeah, cool. Like, what's a normal day look like? And the guy I would like, and this was 2007, and the guy, no shit, was like, well, sometimes you'll have to update the host file, and I'm like, whoa, buddy, like, but like this is all Windows. You have some Active Directory in here somewhere, and they're like, yeah, but like the host file, like why would you trust?
Yeah, Windows has a
DNS?
host file. It's
And-
in-
LM
Like-
hosts. LM hosts.
Yeah, but this
well,
guy just
yeah.
straight
And
up,
host, I know,
just that was his thing. He's like, yeah, one of the things that's really important around here is you'll be updating the DNS file.
I mean, put that sucker on a RAM disk, and you could have a $1 billion business right there.
I have a feeling that Pete is speaking from experience.
I need to check any documents that I've signed about confidentiality before
Right.
confirming or denying that.
who could say? I think Pete just came up with that. I think it's a really novel
Yeah,
thing,
it-
and
it's
I'm going to
really
go make
novel.
that later. Yeah.
It's an original thought, people.
I have a funny story about DNS actually, and it's terrifying for me. When I actually first interviewed at Chef, I had a absolutely bonkers interview panel of people who were like, I was like, oh my god, so and so, oh my god, so and so, and so because this is not terrifying enough, Seth Bargo was one of my interviewers. And he was interviewing me and about network stuff. And he asked me how DNS worked. And I was like,
The answer to that is barely.
yeah, I was like, I have no idea. And I left that room and I was like, I failed. I'm done. Completely not going to happen. But they hired
gotta
me
drop.
anyways.
Right.
I think
Better
at
than
some point
explaining- Oh, yeah.
you end up figuring out that like everybody's just a normal, like, I don't know when that happens in somebody's career, but I like, at least in mine, I've gotten to the point where like everybody's just a person at this point. Like, but I remember early on being like, oh my gosh, I'm at a conference. I'm sitting next to these people. How cool is that? And then you're just like, oh no, everybody is just living their life. It's fine.
Yeah. No
But
matter
for the
what,
first,
though,
for the first 5 years though, you're like, whoa.
no matter what though, Fletcher Nichols is like on a pedestal for me, no matter what. There's a little shout out. He's the best.
Yeah. Both as a human and a technologist.
Exactly. So where do people like, I don't know. I like did when I hang out, I haven't hung out with people that much lately. But where do people think, like when you say DevOps and stuff, like more like we're talking a lot about like, I mean, it's clear like some of us where we're coming from stuff, but like, man, where do people think it's going? Because I'm seeing some really crazy stuff when I'm talking to people like currently, but I can't tell if they're trends or just like weird things, especially around the DevOps space or what you would call DevOps or even operations and things. Are people, anyone else have anything interesting they're seeing or anything like moving forward or?
I don't know. I feel like everything's just packaging up software and running it on a thing.
Right.
That's the like low grade, like maybe depression view of like everything is kind of the same but different. So
but do you, I mean,
Yeah.
oh, go ahead.
I'm sorry. Yeah, I've been interviewing for a while now. I think I've been interviewing for a month for DevOps and /SRE positions. One of the trends that I didn't see before is people asking about shorter feedback cycles. How many questions, at least I had the same question from two different companies. And one of them is, how do you know that a team is high performing? And my answer has been, yeah, they have shorter feedback cycles. So how do you ensure shorter feedback cycles? And then some companies go one direction and some other companies go other direction, but I just tell them, hey, it's about how do you get feedback from your code? How do you get feedback from the infrastructure? How do you get feedback from the from the architecture that you have and stuff like that? So that's a trend that I'm happy to see, because I thought from the beginning that was the right way to do DevOps, right? Right, to shorten the feedback cycles in all the parts of software development. So I'm happy to see that trend, because in the past it was mostly stuff about infrastructure. How can you make better infrastructure? And now things have been evolving into more all-encompassing stuff.
Yeah,
that's what I have seen.
That's totally one of the themes I'm seeing too. But the biggest one that you didn't list that I've kind of been talking to people about is the feedback loop to the business about DevOps, right? Is DevOps an effective strategy? And then I'm always like, well, first tell me what you think DevOps is. And then you always get different answers. And so there's like a moving target to this thing. But Miguel, when you're saying that, I think there's like sort of, you know, did we get infrastructure better? I mean, maybe, faster, maybe, you know, but like for the businesses, it's really like, I still think there's this, like, it's still out to the jury whether the DevOps things that they've done and invested in have actually delivered for the business. So that feedback loop, and that's where it's interesting to see, like, not monitoring or telemetry, but observability or, you know, deeper, like how I just talked to someone on Friday and it was like, you know, they're like, we run our brand new tool and it says 6 out of 10 passed. And I'm like, yeah, that's the problem. Like, what does that mean for a business, right? Like if you show them, if you say like, just use kubectl and see what it says. And they're like, how does this map back to my business, right?
What does it
like,
mean?
Yeah, what does this mean? And so that gap, you know, is the interest, like I think it's a bigger thing even than even just the infrastructure, Miguel. And I think that's interesting. Like, and as a DevOps, especially if you're interviewing or something, bringing that up is like points on the board at that interview, saying, what I really care about is whether what I'm doing every day is helping the business.
Well, depends.
Like,
depends
you're
on
hired.
your.
You're hired.
Yeah, I was gonna say it depends on your interviewer though, right?
Yeah,
exactly. Like if you get like a very strong tech person, they might not make that connection, and that would also be a great sign to know.
That's one of those do you really want to work there kind of things as
right,
well.
Right.
It's an indicator for you.
Yep. I can't remember. This is live stream, but is it recorded?
The live stream goes to YouTube, so there will be a video on YouTube afterwards.
Yeah, good
Yeah.
story for
Yeah.
another time then.
I'm watching
Yeah.
the YouTube feed too. Yeah.
I was gonna to your original question, Lauk. One of the things that I've noticed over the course of time, and like, you know, some of us have been doing this for quite a while, and you know, before like the very beginning of when DevOps was even a thing, and what I've kind of noticed over time is, at least right now, it seems like what companies are doing and what we're seeing is a distillation of the original concepts of DevOps. And whereas like in the mid phase, early phase, it was like, you want to do DevOps, you need some tools. You need Chef, you need Puppet, you need Ansible, you need Terraform, you need whatever. It's like, these are all the things that you need to make a DevOps, right? And now like and I think what was lost back then, and I think this is kind of partially all of our fault, it's to a certain degree, is like, you know, the tool doesn't matter. The outcome is what matters. Like bringing those original ideas of, like you were saying, Miguel, like faster feedback loops, being able to deploy quickly, being able to observe your software, actually having a thing where you're like, this is a business outcome, and we're tying it directly to Joshua's favorite thing, OKRs. But you know, you're actually proving that that I said actually like 4 times here. Sorry. You are proving that you are doing stuff that directly impacts the business outcomes that your bosses want. So that's what I've been seeing, and it's honestly really cool to see that, because it's like the ideas that a lot of folks had back then are now coming to fruition, and it doesn't really matter what the tools are, other than mine, because you should always buy mine. But you know,
Yeah, or not coming to fruit. This is the thing. So it depends. Like I can see why. I mean, obviously people have jobs in their workplaces, but if you're sort of a little bit floating out there, having been there but not somewhere else right now, I think I'm getting some interesting conversations, a little more frankly, about more questions of, did this actually deliver the outcome, or what was even the outcome we were trying to deliver? We thought it was get to the cloud. Now we're in the cloud and DNS is still failing, right? Like, or we went to containers and now I have to hire 20 people who understand Bash. I thought containers didn't have Bash in them. And we're like, I'm not, it's true, there's not, it's Ash. And they're like, what is that? Right. Like, so, but like, I'm getting a lot of questions about, you know, you're totally right, Scott, the outcome, but it can go both ways. Did it work? Right. I think, or not. Right. And so, obviously if you work somewhere, you want to be like, no, we're just building on all the successes you had. But also I think there's a little bit of crying out for like, how do we even know that this worked? Like,
and
right?
I think that goes to, I'm joking about I'm razzing Joshua about the OKRs, but I think like there is something about not necessarily that methodology, but having a way of measuring what you're doing. I mean, like Nicole and company and you know, Jez and everybody, they've been talking for years about how do you measure what you're doing.
Yep.
And but Miguel,
Miguel
I totally
had something
interrupted
to
you.
say.
Sorry.
Yeah, no, it's fine. It just to be fair, there is a follow-up question to that thing of how do you know that it's a high-performing team, and what I tell them is, and how does that benefit me, right? How does that benefit the business for sure? And what I tell them is, okay, I'm biased because I have worked with, I will say, medium to large companies, and they already established there, but they want to prototype products faster. So the kind of platforms that I develop and the kind of platforms that I've been trying to specialize into, they allow you to create prototypes faster and have them in production as fast as possible, right? And then we start to talk about the capability models and things like, I don't like Safe, but they have a really good, I will say, like model. They say, hey, you can deploy this in minutes, you can deploy this in months, you're going to take years maybe to deploy, and they are very stuff like that. So you start to tell them, okay, you can prototype faster, you can create new business lines faster, and that helps you to then measure the prototypes, the MVPs, if you will, and that will help you to bring new business to the company, right? But again, I'm biased because I work with medium to large companies. that not necessarily may help a startup, right? Because I have interviewed for startup, then they said, yeah, but I already want this to be shipped, right? Not other stuff. I don't want to branch right now.
I think another lens on that, kind of, Scott, to your point, I mean, I can only speak for a current employer. We are having a lot of success using OKRs, but to sort of enact and measure some of the DevOps principles that we keep saying, we really ought to be doing that. We're not doing that. When you run it through the OKR process, like that is a form of communication with high levels of management at the company, you know, and engineers who, I mean, I'm a project manager by trade, so I don't have engineers who work for me, but engineers who work around me. And so that really helps generate that alignment, and that helps all of the company make trade-offs to say, oh, wait a minute, we do need that outcome. And so we're starting to measure like, hey, we know we have this legacy application that's been running for a giant pile of time. Here are some things we can do to enable the right teams of people to own the right outcomes. And, this kind of bumps into SRE, as it overlays with DevOps, but like, how do we make sure that the right people are getting the right alerts and empowered to act on them, in the right way? Like, that's something that we're starting to, like, kind of thing we're pushing into OKRs and having the conversation about. And we're starting to get that in a place where if you're doing planning right, you also can start excluding like, oh, we want this new shiny thing. It's like, okay, great, but we have to make the foundation of the thing we're running work really well. And so we're starting to get that using, the planning process we all just laughed at.
Oh yeah, and the other side, now that I have a manager hat on now, is like, yeah, no, I am did you know that, Lauk? I am a manager now, like officially. Who'd have thunk it?
We can't be friends anymore. Sorry.
I know, right? But to the point, like, one of the things that's really useful for me and out of that process, and this is sort of a thing about prioritizing and focusing on these specific outcomes. It's like, I need headcount. Like, how much money do you want to put into this? Like, when do you want this done? And when do you this is what I can deliver you based on the folks that I have on my team and the amount of work that this stuff is. So like, more people, there's obviously a lot of conversations about how many people can be productive, et cetera, but like, there is definitely some truth to making sure your teams are the right size to be able to deliver the amount of work that is expected to meet a goal.
What, like, you think there's hidden costs? So, you go into your OKRs and everyone's like, oh, we're gonna rub DevOps all over this. It's gonna hit these OKRs. And then there's like, what I'm seeing is a lot of hidden costs, right? Like, you're not just saying we're going to use DevOps to do this, but you're not counting the part about switching to DevOps or switching operations to developers or things like that. Have people seen that? Like, I think I've been talking a lot more with actual like enterprises, about hidden costs that they're seeing that DevOps. Like, I didn't know I had to hire 50 engineers just to do DNS now, right? You have to account for that maybe, or I don't know what people are seeing, if that's a thing.
Well, what I have seen is not so much about the cost, but policies that don't scale. And I think I read that on the book of software engineering at Google, and they mentioned policies that don't scale, right? And one of them was infrastructure. If you push changes to the infrastructure that are not backwards compatible, that becomes work for all the teams, right? Because I usually work in central teams, which are the ones that push infrastructure, so other teams consume it. So you start adding non-backwards compatible changes to that infrastructure, then the other teams have to take those changes, have to provision accordingly, and they have to deal with them. And one of the ways is that, okay, they have just to deal with the pain, but that's the worst possible solution because that adds a lot of hours, right? So a central team can also be not only a multiplicator, right, or an accelerator, it can also slow down some other teams, right? And that's something that I have seen many managers concerned to, because they say, okay, yeah, I bring this DevOps team and they are doing a really good job automating infrastructure, but this is adding a lot of cost to the other teams because infrastructure is not backwards compatible. I have seen that many times for sure.
I gotta run, y'all. It's been great talking. See y'all later.
Thanks for coming in. What else is everyone working on? Anything cool?
I'm just interviewing quite a bit. I have 2 jobs now, and one of them is going to finish in December, and the other one is consulting, so it's feast or famine. So I've been interviewing just to try to get a job. But yeah, I have interviewed. I think one of my mentors, the best thing that he taught me was interview every year, regardless of if you're not looking for a job or not. And that has gave me perspective because I keep notes of the interviews that I have and all that kind of stuff, and gives me perspective of where the trends are going and what technologies I need to learn and what practices I need to start practicing and stuff like that, just to get a more competitive salary. And not only that, but also like be one of the first people onboarding on a technology that I think is good and stuff like that. So it has facilitated a lot of the interviewing process. But every 5 years or so, everything changes so radically that, yeah, it's complicated.
Yeah, I can definitely speak to that, like feast or famine, and it comes to consulting. And I mean, I did that a few years ago, and you got to stomaching those swings can be hard when you have a lot of stuff coming in, and you're like, "This is great," and then you have nothing, and you're like, "Oh God."
Yeah, it's bootstrapping's tough. But I think everyone here knows that there's no shortage of work. I'm seeing a lot, like there's a lot of need actually right now because people are moving around. And so anyone, like I said, it's not for everyone, but anyone who's kind of free floating and able to fill in gaps is going to be busy, right? You get really busy.
I think Scott forgot. Did you forget something? Did you leave something behind, Scott?
I did actually. I was just going to really quickly mention that Seagull is happening Friday and Saturday, the Seattle GNU Linux conference. It's free. It's online. There's a lot of great speakers there. I am not affiliated with it in any way, but there's a bunch of cool people talking. So I wanted to just let that be a thing. So yeah, that's all. Bye.
Just coming in hot with that one.
I know.
Question.
He literally seagulled. He flew in and
it was
ate her fries and took off. Right.
Dan posted into the Zoom chat thoughts on platform engineering intersecting with DevOps or DevOps rebranding to platforms. It's a super interesting. I mean, I feel like, I don't know. I always felt like DevOps was platform engineering in some ways, but I was also the person that was like, DevOps is not a job title and stop doing that until I did it. And then I realized that like, well, you could also make like more money being called a DevOps, just like you can make more money calling yourself an SRE. So like, go get paid, like.
Yeah. It's like when you talk to a company and they're like, we're a software company. And then you talk to another company and they're like, all companies are software companies. I'm like, so just say company, right? And so saying DevOps, development operations, I think actually where we're heading is it's just operations. It's just everyone's doing it by development. And so, yeah. And I mean, I literally had that happen where you roll into a big enterprise and say, this portal's not what you want. And then 3 years later, they're like, GitHub's kind of like our portal now. And you're like, yeah. Like, so it really is just, it's platform. Yeah.
Yeah. It's fascinating.
Yeah, it's just that DevOps is the all-encompassing term that then we keep just adding stuff to it. Because I remember when we had release engineering, and I remember when we had platform engineering, and I remember when we had an infrastructure engineering, right? And they at least for I do have I'm in a mentorship program, and where they tell me, hey, I want to become a DevOps engineer. And I tell them, yeah, okay, so you have to take like 3 pillars, right? Is the organizational component, the CI/CD part, and the infrastructure scope, right? So usually CI/CD is the I will say the central pillar, because you will be CI/CDing the infrastructure, you will be CI/CDing the organizational component to the microservice and all that kind of stuff. And then you can take infrastructure as code. Well, then you start to go into say, okay, if I just specialize too much into CI/CD, isn't that different from release engineering, right? Because I had a talk where I was discussing a Facebook post from 2008, I believe, where they had like a release engineering, and they were practicing rollbacks and roll forwards and that kind of stuff. So I tell them, yeah, that thing has been there forever. So we're just reinventing the wheel and then adding everything into a single encompassing term for sure.
Thank you, everyone. I'm gonna take off, but good to see you, y'all. Take care. Nice to meet
Good to
you.
see you, Stephen. Thanks for joining us. We have some late join. Hello, Daniel.
Come, yeah, every week.
Yep, every
It's
week,
happening.
same bat channel. Not missed entirely, but we are at the top of the hour, and we'll be back next week though.
Same. Did we do that last time? Same bat time, same bat channel.
You know, that is I've been a dad for a while, so like that shit just never gets old, really. I still think it's funny. My wife still rolls her eyes.
Yeah,
I literally spaced out and then like looked at announcements and was like, oh no.
well, every Wednesday. Although we should probably, I wonder if there's probably like an opportunity to do like an EU version, you know, for I don't even know what it's. Yeah, because it's like end of the day. It's kind of. Yeah, I guess that was like the hope, right? Is that we're catching like morning time West Coast, maybe like end of day EU.
People joining from the pub, and by the pub I mean from their kitchen, because you know who's going to pubs in 2021.
That is true. Only the outdoor ones,
right?
This is great. Always a fan,
Indeed.
Joshua. Well done. Thanks everyone for
Thanks everyone for coming in.
coming in.
Conversation.
Thanks, Joshua.
All right.
It's great.
Thank
See
you very
everyone
much.
next week.